boy, this one might tick off a few people. Now, it's no surprise that I enjoy the Mass Effect series. Yeah, even the third one, original ending and all. Don't get me wrong, I get why people were pissed off there. But the overall experience was still a lot of fun, and I do think stuff like the DLC helped to fix at least some of the negatives. When a fourth title in the series was announced, I was excited. And then the game got its advertisements, demos, and whatnot. And the reception to much of this was less than ideal. 5 years of development and something like $40 million, and yet it was full of awkward animation and questionable social politic choices. And upon release, a lot of bugs. The game is easily the lowest rated in the franchise. It seems to generate more hate than I've seen any other recent game get. Except Battlefront 2. But is it actually that bad a game? That remains to be seen. Let's find out if Mass Effect Andromeda is worth the hate. Now, keep in mind, I'm playing the game after many patches. My experiences aren't going to be the same as someone who bought the game at launch and may have experienced a massive bug fest. Which I've heard it was. I can only relay what I personally experienced for the most part. I'm also playing the PlayStation 4 version, so I can't say how other versions perform. So the game begins 600 years after the events of Mass Effect 2, with a group of travelers reaching the Andromeda galaxy after being in stasis for all that time. I say Mass Effect 2 because as far as the main cast is concerned, they have no clue about the events of Mass Effect 3. The Initiative, as it's called, came in search of new worlds to explore. Pretty standard stuff. It's here you're introduced to your protagonist, Ryder, his or her twin sibling, and their father. So, right off the bat, things do hit a bit of a snag. The customization is notably weaker than the previous entries. It's a bit on the oversimplified side. You certainly won't have a hard time making a decent-looking character, but you're not really given much in the way of tweaks. You pick a template face and can slightly edit it. And that's kind of a shame, especially after the crazy customization Dragon Age Inquisition had. Now, to its credit, the hairstyles are a lot better than DAI's. And hey, hair physics to boot. I had very little trouble finding a fitting hairstyle. In fact, just choosing a single one was kind of difficult. And if you don't like your appearance, the game does allow you to recustomize your face as soon as you can enter the medbay on your ship. Still, the limited customization is a bit of a disappointment. On a more positive note, you at least get to customize both you and your twin's appearance. Whichever sibling you don't choose is made into an NPC, which is a nice aspect. The customization doesn't amount to much, but I like the idea of being able to have my character's sibling be designed by my own hand. Another nice feature is you can save your character's appearance, so if you completely botch it up, you have a backup. And Alec, your character's father, will inherit an appearance based off yours and your siblings. Again, it's a minor aspect, but it's welcome, and I'd love to see more games in the future allow you to customize more than just your own character's appearance. Still, it's more than a little obnoxious. Your faces are just basically slightly tweakable presets. For those of us that love to go hog wild, it's underwhelming to say the least. Not the worst custom character generator I've seen, but nowhere near as remotely awesome as some I've seen. Also, your eyebrows. Your damn eyebrows. That's not even a joke. You can't change your eyebrow color, which basically means your character is going to look really stupid if you don't have something that meshes well with dark brown eyebrows. It seems like such a bizarre thing to not have, and even more so after all the patches. So, after the customization, we wake up from our stasis pod in the Andromeda galaxy. It starts off peaceful enough, but of course things immediately go wrong, your coffee goes undrank, and your sibling gets jumbled about and can't wake up. Shortly after, you're given some tutorial stuff about walking around and scanning shit. And I gotta say, I kinda like the scanner. It's easy enough to use, makes important stuff glow bright red when you're looking at it, and I just find it a cool way to present things. Nothing mind-blowing, but it's more than simply walk up to the thing and press X. Then again, it's just kinda stand there at a distance and press X, but whatever. There's plenty of both. After some exposition, you see your father for the first time in 600 years and find out the planet that was picked out to be the new human homeworld isn't quite what was expected. It's up to you and your dad's team to investigate. See, Alec Ryder is a pathfinder, which is really just a fancy way of saying he scouts out planets for the purpose of terraforming. You and your team get sent to said planet, and it immediately turns to crap as your shuttle explodes and you and another party member, named Liam, crash land on the surface. And it's here I'm going to talk about the graphics. You know what? This game looks gorgeous. Well, the environments do anyway. They're huge, detailed, and varied. Each world in this game, and there's quite a number of them, looks so diverse and different from one another. The lighting is great, and it just looks aesthetically pleasing. Then there's the character models. Okay, I'll put it this way. The character models themselves aren't bad, and in most major cutscenes the characters look just fine. But we've all seen the "my face is tired" meme. And yeah, there's a lot of dead, expressionless faces in the game, especially in normal conversations. It's not usually too bad, at least with the main cast, but some of those NPCs, man. I have seen some shit, man. I have seen some shit! And this is where I find my feelings on the game in conflict with a lot of people who bring up the original trilogy. You know what? The original trilogy had plenty of silly-looking animations too. And if you look at the start of the original trilogy, Mass Effect 1 had some kind of fugly-looking models. Now, you're probably saying, but this is a console generation later. They should have learned and done better. And you're not wrong. Granted, this is a different team entirely. This was their first game, and sadly it looks to be their last, so we may not get to see them improve. But they could have made things better in some aspects, yes. It's a conflict I'm of a mixed opinion on. That being said, I do think the animation stuff has been blown a bit out of proportion, even if Addison's face freaks me out too. And to their credit, there was an improvement over time with patches. Now, of course, they should have just shipped the game with some damn polish to begin with, and it's perfectly reasonable to be annoyed at EA's practices regarding that. Don't get me wrong, I love the concept of patches and bug fixes, not to mention the potential for new game content being added, as long as it's an actual update and not merely something cut from the game for time or something they were too lazy to test. The problem, of course, is that patches are so frequently used for just that. They are used to simply correct what they didn't bother to test in the first place, or to add promised content post-release. However, it seems many complaints were noted and attempted to be fixed from an initially very rough launch. Thing is, they were doing this back with the original Mass Effect trilogy too. Now, granted, I don't know how messy Andromeda actually was at launch, but heaven knows the original trilogy had its fair share of nasty bugs, and some of them have never gotten patched, even to this day. I think I only had the game freeze on me once or twice, and the rest of the bugs were just physics or animation glitches, but maybe I just completely lucked out. Of course, I'm getting the slightest bit off topic. This is a review of Mass Effect Andromeda, and not the original trilogy. However, considering much of the controversy of this game is centered around people who were upset that it didn't match the quality of the original trilogy, I do think it's warranted. I'll also bring up a few comparisons here and there to BioWare's previous title, Dragon Age Inquisition. And by no means am I attempting to discredit those players on their thoughts. Many of them could have had an absolutely awful experience and dropped the game before patches, and frankly, I can't blame them. Even I've played plenty of games that were a grotesque abomination until they got patched, and many that remained after being patched. But again, off topic. Back to the game, and sorry for blathering there. It's here where you get into the actual gameplay stuff. And honestly, this opening area, I think it's pretty good. While it lacks the exciting presentation of Mass Effect 3's superb opening, you're actually given a pretty substantial area to run around in. It's also here where we're introduced to two of the new mechanics, the jump jets and the evasion dash. The jump jets are just wonderful in general. Being able to jump and hover makes both exploration and combat more user-friendly. and hovering over a guy while shooting him in the face makes you feel just pretty awesome. It's easy to use, and it makes getting to cover better than ever. This also gives you the option for a melee drop attack, which isn't the best as it feels a bit awkward to aim, but it does look cool.
You're gonna do superhero landing. Wait for it. Woo! Superhero landing.
The evasion dash thing is just plain great in general. It allows you to quickly move around and get more distance out of your jumps. It can also change depending on your class. Infiltrators, for instance, to a Nightcrawler-esque poof from one spot to the other. It looks cool, and is practical to boot. Perhaps my favorite addition to movement is the ability to just make a mad dash. Not only is it great to have in missions, being much more fluid in movement than ME3's dash, but you can even use it when not on a mission. Running around in the hub areas has never been better. No more sluggish trotting along when you need to go shopping or turn in a side quest. Just hold down the button, or in this case the analog stick, and watch as Ryder gets their necessary cardio workout. Shortly after, you'll find one of the other people from the Pathfinder team being attacked by aliens. These guys are the Ket, and they're the primary antagonists of the game. And it's here we're introduced to the combat of the game. And oh, baby! They took the combat in an amazing direction in this game. Mostly. Because of the aforementioned movement changes, combat is faster paced. You can now take pot shots while in cover. It's less accurate, but you'll be safer. But the thing is, the enemies are smarter too. They'll frequently try to flank you, while still using things like grenades and such to flush you from cover. And they come at you in pretty large numbers pretty often. It makes fighting more frantic and exciting, and it's a whole lot more fun. Your powers have individual cooldowns as well, allowing you to make your own combos, and seriously, this is such a huge improvement over use one skill and wait for all of them to cool down. There are downsides though. You can only equip 3 powers at a time. You can't just bring up the ability wheel and use others. This is an odd choice, given that your classes mostly just affect stats and passives. Any class can technically use any skill. Sadly, you can't command your party members anymore either. You can still order them to cover a specific point, which I think works a little bit better than the original trilogy, but sometimes they'll still ignore your commands and just drop out of cover. But the loss of ordering your teammates to use specific weapons or skills is severely noticeable. To their credit, your AI partners aren't usually total bean dips. You'll see them frequently use abilities semi-intelligently. There are plenty of times where I'd use a power mid-fight and they'd take the initiative and follow my priming up with a trigger of their own. You also can't equip your teammates at all. You can still select what skills they learn, thankfully, but they'll use whatever equipment they feel like. Now, granted, this was true of ME2, but this game has an equipment system not unlike the first games. So, while you can deck out Ryder in some pretty great gear, don't expect to use it on your teammates. You also can't have them learn their rank 6 skills until you complete their loyalty missions. I actually like this choice, and frankly, the loyalty missions are some of the best missions in the game. The way learning skills is handled is pretty much carried over from ME3. After a certain point, skills branch and you can choose between 2 different power-ups. I'm happy they retained this aspect, as it helps add a bit of value to learning skills beyond simply a little bit more powerful. As you and Liam continue clearing out the Ket, there's also some platforming sprinkled in. And actually, this isn't bad at all. It isn't awesome or anything, but it's generally well placed, and thanks to the extra control of the jump jets, you shouldn't have too much trouble with it. There are times where Ryder will be stingy about grabbing onto ledges for some reason, but it's not that frequent. Even better, when you fail most of the platforming bits, you'll simply spawn back near it. Sometimes you lose a bit of health and shields, though that's a little inconsistent. Speaking of health and shields, I'm happy to say this game has great checkpoints. While it does away with ME3's quick save, you don't generally lose too much progress if you die. Granted, this does take away some of the punishment for screwing up, but it also reduces a lot of frustration. Also, I just want to put this out there. Holy crap, the load times are so much better than the previous trilogies. That's not to say there isn't load times. There is. But it's usually just when starting up the game. Most of the time in-game, your loads are going to be fairly swift. Occasionally you'll get a lengthy one here or there, but it's nothing like the slogs that were in the previous entries. It's a huge improvement and makes needing something to do in between load times a whole lot less necessary. A little further in, you meet up with another party member, a woman named Cora. She's basically your father's second in command, and is fending off a group of enemies from the rest of the team. After a quick slaughter, the three of you go off to find your father, who's in front of a facility. You have to do the typical sit here and fend off the group of enemies while protecting him type mission, although I don't think he can actually be injured. Once you clear it, your dad is able to fix the environment, which was being made toxic by this big-ass monolithic thingamabobber. But it explodes and sends you flying. You get a reasonably emotional scene here, and wake up with Sam, the support tech your father created, talking in your head. You're soon told that you're the new Pathfinder, that when your father stuck his helmet on you, he was passing control of Sam over to you. Unfortunately, Ryder isn't really given any time to grieve as you've arrived at the Nexus and need to investigate why they're not responding to your docking request. The Nexus is essentially Andromeda's equivalent of the Citadel. It's the central location of the new galaxy's government, more or less, and it acts as a hub for most of the game. Upon arrival, it seems the Nexus may be abandoned. The systems are apparently up to date, but everything seems shut down until you come across a lone worker messing with a panel. He reveals the human arc, Hyperion, is the first to arrive, and the others seem to be lost. You're then introduced to the leaders of Andromeda's government. Tan is the lead director, but he comes across more as a scheming opportunist, something the others seem to imply about the Solarian. Kandros, a Turian, which makes him automatically cool, runs the security team for the Nexus and leads the Apex operations. Think of them like the operations you could send soldiers out on in Dragon Age Inquisition, but with a random chance of victory based on who you send. Alternatively, you can actually take part in these missions yourself, which takes up most of the meat of the multiplayer mode. Next is Addison. Her face is tired. She's also kind of a bitch, which is somewhat justified given the situation, but at the same time, she's still a bitch. Granted, you can bitch right back at her a few times if you feel like it. Also, her face is tired. Last is Kesh. Kesh is a Krogan, which also automatically makes her cool. Kesh probably gets the most development of the bunch, but that's tied to another character who I'll mention later. If I'm being honest, I find these characters much more tolerable than the Citadel Council from the original trilogy. They're actually even relevant to the main plot and do more than sit there and say, well, we know that you've literally been right about absolutely everything you've ever done, but we're gonna just sit here with our thumbs up our butts. They're still kinda assholes, though. You're eventually sent to Sam's core, where he'll explain how you can now use profiles, which are the previously mentioned classes. And he sets you off on a lengthy side quest that'll take most of the game to finish. It's sort of like the Find the Shards quest in DAI, but less likely to aggravate you, since there's some story to go with each bit of the quest. It slowly unlocks Alec's memories for Sam to play to you, and it ultimately plays well into the overall plot. Sadly, with this game not getting a sequel, the full payoff of this side quest might not be ever known, unless it's mentioned in the book sequel. For the record, I do think the payoff we get is really good, but I'm not going to spoil it. Then again, I also like the Shard quest in DAI, so maybe I'm not the best person to ask. From here, you're given a little bit of freedom. Not a ton, but you can partake in some side quests. Now, one of the big negatives this game got slapped with was the sheer number of busy work side quests. This was something that was starting to poke its head back in Mass Effect 3. Really, it began in Dragon Age 2, but who's keeping count? And of course, Dragon Age Inquisition had a shit ton of these. And yeah, there's a lot of study this rock, or find this needle in this haystack type of crap quest. But I think in general, the quests are a bit better than those previously mentioned games. It's not perfect by any means, but there's a lot more quests that have a bit of context and meat to them. Your mileage may still vary, but I feel like there was some decent effort put into these. Once you're ready, you head off to the dock to find your ship, the Tempest, and meet another new party member, a Turian named Vetra who seems well connected. She's actually a smuggler and joins you because she wants to get shit done, and of course, it's helpful to have someone who can get you rare goods. Except this never actually really comes into play in-game. Despite this, I won't deny Vetra is one of my favorite characters in this title. She's well fleshed out over the course of the story, and her little sister is part of it. Her sister isn't just some NPC that shows up once, and you can actually find her on the Nexus and talk to her. She comes into play on a few side quests, too. Vetra has great banter with another party member you get a little later on. She gets you cleared to leave the Nexus, and now you can fly around the galaxy. And I'm not gonna lie, I love the new map system. While you don't get direct control over your ship, making it more akin to the first Mass Effect, that's okay. Honestly, digging for minerals was a pain in the ass in ME2, and it got tedious doing searching for assets in ME3. This game cuts the bullshit and gets to the point, and although each system usually has things to look for, it's rarely anything that's absolutely necessary. But a major reason why I enjoy this so much is just the presentation. Going from system to system or planet to planet just looks so cool. The whole gliding through space thing just seems so tranquil and it looks beautiful. And if you don't want to watch the cinematic travel bits, there is a nice little skip button. Also, your ship has a staff just like the original trilogy. We've already met Kaidan and Ashley, Liam and Cora, and I didn't hate them as much as I thought I would. Neither one bored me like Kaidan, although I don't think either one had as much definition as Ashley. To his credit, Liam has some quirks that legitimately got a chuckle out of me, such as setting up a movie night, which results in a long side quest that lasts most of the game, much like the Sam one, but focuses on the ship's crew and has a fantastic payoff. Or bringing a couch all the way from the Milky Way, even if he tends to occasionally be as incompetent as Jenkins. Cora is just kind of jealous you're the new Pathfinder and goes on about Masari Commando training, but she doesn't get on my nerves as much as Kaidan or Liara did. They're certainly more entertaining than Jacob, but not as amusing as James. As mentioned before, Vetra is a Turian smuggler, and therefore is awesome. I liked how a lot of her personal character arc focuses on her family, and she's in general just a character I liked. She's mercifully not meant to be a Garrus stand-in, which really would have been easy for them to do. Dr. Lexi is definitely less likable than Michelle, and certainly nowhere near as memorable as Chalk was. So sorry for leaving you behind in ME3, Chalk was. Also, she makes Ryder eat his or her vegetables, so she's totally a killjoy. The ship's engineer, Gil, is an okay character. He's no standout and is nothing compared to Gabby and Ken, but still has some decent conversations. I especially like how he has arguments with Callow. Speaking of Callow, he's mostly just kinda there. While he does have some great insight into the ship's development, he doesn't have much of a personality or presence. He's definitely no Joker. He's not even a Callow Nord. I hope someone gets that joke. Next is Suvi. She's a red-headed religious scientist who licks stuff. Not even joking about that. She licks stuff to see if it's edible. I find her to be mildly entertaining. There's more characters, but I'll get to them as they join. For this initial group, I never found them particularly irritating, even if many of them aren't as memorable as the original trilogy's cast. Eventually, you need to make your way to Eos, where settlers tried, and failed, to put a foothold on the planet. It's infested with Ket, and there's a lot of radiation outside of the settlement's bubble to boot. Your first objective here is to get the power back onto the settlement. Of course, a scavenger is there and tells you that fiddling with the power will draw in Ket troops. They're easily dealt with, however. He then tells you to go call yourself a ride. The Nomad is your primary means of travel on the planet, and it's probably the first time I actually enjoyed a vehicle in a BioWare game. The Mako wasn't unusable, but was clunky and slow, and even though it was only in the DLC, screw ME2's Hammerhead and the booster it hovered in on. While I didn't hate the mounts in DAI, I found them basically useless and usually just plain forgot it was a thing. Like DAI's mounts, you can't fight from the Nomad, but this really isn't an issue. It's fast enough to get you out of trouble most of the time, and it has a practical use besides movement, since many environments, including Eos, are dangerous, so staying in the Nomad can keep you from dying to radiation or freezing to death or what have you. It also has a 6-wheel drive mode, which makes it slower, but now it can climb steep inclines. On top of that, it's got a nice booster and can jump pretty smoothly. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, though. The boost kinda takes a while to fully recharge, and running over enemies is pretty much useless. There are upgrades to get, but it wasn't until late in the game that I even found a single one, although that might just be chalked up to me not bothering to even check the shops. A short distance away you'll come across some remnant technology. These usually have some puzzle codes you need to study before you can interact with them. I like these well enough since they add a bit of variety, but I suck at these puzzles and usually find myself just looking up the answers. I'm a lazy shit, I know. That being said, you don't need to look them up necessarily, because even if you get stuck, there's items you can get that allow you to skip the process entirely. And here, we're introduced to Rocket Raccoon. Liara. PB. Okay, as much as I tend to rag on Liara, snarking it up about how she eternally sounds like she's in the throes of Dole Surprise, my goodness, do I wish she was here instead. PB is probably the only character in the game who gets on my nerves. Honestly, despite having a near-identical backstory to Liara in that she's a scientist who studies the ruins of an advanced civilization and has disappeared to history, she's more like Morden. That is, if Morden was a charmless, obnoxious gas bag. She's even less likely to shut up than I am, and yet somehow still has nothing to actually say. She does at least give you a nice extra power to learn, but sometimes you just want to strangle her. She also looks kinda derpy with the raccoon paint. Or is that natural? I don't know, and I don't care. On a side note, I will admit she at least looks unique as far as the Asari go in this game. For some strange reason, every other Asari in this game has literal same-face syndrome. Either someone goofed something fierce on the dev team, or it's a big family. Maybe they're all Frank Castle descendants. Our priority becomes finding each of these remnant monoliths and activating them. There's 3 in total, and each one is spread across the area. One of them, of course, is surrounded by a Ket installment. Once you clear out the area, we're introduced to a grumpy old Krogan. This guy is Drac. He's a party member, but he won't join until you finish this first main quest, so we'll talk about him later. And for now, just say that he's awesome, since he's a Krogan. Once the last monolith is activated, it opens up an underground vault. Head there and go inside, and oh my goodness, I do love the vaults. These things are part dungeon, part puzzle, part platformer, and part marathon. The first one is probably the longest, save for a massive one near the end of the game. And these are honestly some of the biggest highlights of the game, blending multiple gameplay elements together. All that's really missing is a boss fight at the end of each one. But that's something in short supply in this game, although really that was true of the original trilogy too. Once you reach the end, you're prompted to reboot the vaults, causing a destructive black mist to spread through it, and leading you to make a mad dash back to the entrance. During these chase sequences, a barrier drops and you're able to grab a rare item you could only see before. After you make it to the exit, the vault shuts tight and the world begins to clear. In the case of Eos, it's not instantaneous, but you've still made the planet more hospitable. Eventually, the radiation will dissipate entirely and you won't have to worry about it at all, once you come back to check on your settlement now that it's been established. But first, you need to set up said establishment. And it turns out the spot that would be ideal has some Ket, and a grumpy old Krogan shooting at them. Once you clear it, Drac, impressed by your ability to be more competent than a shit ton of NPCs, will join you. Also PB, unfortunately. Addison arrives with some settlers and apologizes for underestimating you, but is still kind of a bitch. You're now able to decide whether to make the settlement a scientific one or a military one. As far as I know, this actually affects very little, unfortunately, and I'm not sure if it would have paid off in the sequel we'll likely never get. It doesn't help that you don't seem to get to choose the way other settlements play out either, which is a bit of a shame, especially after being able to somewhat customize your base in DAI. Also, it's here that I want to bring up an aspect I really loved in Dragon Age Inquisition: the crafting. I absolutely adored the way crafting was handled in DAI. You had so many options for customization. Individual materials would change the stats or passives you got, influence the color, although you could still dye your clothes, and just generally make some awesome gear. It actually made me care about going around and finding resources, and made finding or buying new blueprints such a blast. Mass Effect Andromeda also has a crafting system, but it's nowhere near as interesting. It winds up boiling down to using set materials, with the only real way of influencing the gear being various add-ons that can be crafted or purchased. While some of these are nice, it lacks the value of searching through each of your materials and going, "Oh, this one gives me an automatic counterattack of hidden blades if an enemy hits me." You can research more gear blueprints, but this basically just raises the stats, and the only thing that prevents you from going nuts is level locks. Truth be told, after a while I didn't even really care because my custom gear already outdid most of the threats before I was halfway through the game. You can get mods for your gear on top of that, but a lot of these are kinda hit and miss. In fact, items in general feel like they're just kinda there. They have their uses for sure, but despite having expanded on the concept of using items beyond metagel, I don't think I ever really used anything other than maybe shield capacitors, and I only wound up using it maybe twice on my first playthrough. The new inventory menu is also quite a bit clunkier than DAI's. It gives off a feeling of being cluttered, though not quite as bad as ME1's. Either way, you're told to go back to the Nexus, where 10 does his typical shtick of trying to get on your good side. You can basically throw it back in his face, and he just turns it to his advantage. I found it funny how he's such a schemer that he can twist people telling him off into a positive. You also get to find out Kesh is Drax's granddaughter. Fun! Seriously, why are Krogan always so great? It turns out that she's been keeping in touch with the Krogan who left the Nexus after putting down the riots when they were denied representation. The conflict of her loyalty to her people and her loyalty to the Initiative sadly isn't hugely fleshed out, but it does add a bit of personality to her. Speaking of which, I didn't really talk about Drax much yet. He's a lot like Rex, but a little less hostile and offers advice regularly. Usually. He frequently feels like the dad of the group, especially toward Vetra. Is it any wonder why I brought these two along for most of the game, with their back and forth about family dynamics? Sadly, while you can flirt a little with the big guy, there's still no Krogan romance in this series. Krogan are still a no-bone zone. Not that I feel the need to have my digital gal porking every alien species, but why are you racist against Krogan, BioWare? Jokes aside, Drax has some interesting insights on the Ket when you speak with him. He helps to round out the cast. In fact, in general, while I feel like the cast might be a bit hit and miss, especially compared to the original trilogy, I felt like they're more of an actual team. Most of the squad barely interacted with each other in the OT, and what development or personality they had was only conveyed in conversations with Shepard. Andromeda's characters are constantly talking with each other, both on the ship and out on the field, and they banter between one another more than most games. I think it helps flesh them out. It's also not like they do nothing but talk, just often enough to break the silence. It's more frequent than DAI, but you won't be screaming at them to shut up like in Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. Back in the Hyperion, you get to talk to your sibling here. No, they're not actually awake yet, but it's still a great interaction by way of Sam. You're able to lie to their face or tell them what really happened. Don't know about the former, but the latter puts them into a coma. Good job, sibling! Rest assured, your sibling does have an important role, but it's not until near the end of the game, and I don't want to spoil it. Yeah, I know, I'm spoiling a lot of the early stuff, but this is a fairly meaty game. I believe my first run cleared at around 50 or 60 hours. Not as long as DAI, but it felt more substantial by comparison. It's also around now that cryo points are introduced. These are basically the same thing as the Inquisition perks from DAI. Do enough stuff, get a cryo point, and unlock a perk. It's a decent reward for playing, but I don't think they're as interesting as some of those from that game. Your next main objective is to check out another vault. This one is on a planet called Aya. On your way, a cutscene interrupts and you're stopped by the Ket. Part of what I like about interacting with the Ket is just how vicious you can make Ryder when talking with them. It's pretty fun seeing Ryder get so hostile, especially given how you spend so much of the game snarking or being a doormat, depending on your responses. You know, I haven't talked about Ryder yet. Ryder gets a lot of flack for not being Shepard. and frankly, I don't get why. Don't get me wrong, I liked Shepard. Shepard was a great protagonist for the original trilogy, but Ryder isn't supposed to be Shepard. Shepard was a soldier first and foremost, and that's not a bad thing. But Ryder isn't the same character and shouldn't be like Shepard. Now granted, doing away with Paragon and Renegade choices is a bummer, although you still have the occasional prompt. And maybe that's what a lot of people are referring to. However, for the type of character Ryder is, I found them enjoyably snarky.
You willing to bet my life on that? Yup. Fuck you.
Maybe it's just because Shepard had the
Bang, okay?
although Ryder has the
I am Pathfinder. Rah, 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 rah.
Anyway, back into the story, you're forced to make an emergency landing on Aya, which turns out to be populated. It's primarily inhabited by a race called the Angara. These guys also got a lot of flack, though I don't really know why. Some people complain that it's a case of a race already having their shit together in the Andromeda galaxy, and knowing the ins and outs of it. But I don't really get that complaint, at least not fully. I thought they were pretty well fleshed out lore-wise, and I kinda dig their designs. Their pastel colors also make them stand out visually, which is kinda nice. You'll find out they're fighting against the Ket too, but aren't exactly trusting of you. Which is understandable when the last alien race they met keeps kidnapping them and doing who knows what to them. One of them basically screams in your face for a while, until another suggests going with you to find out if you're trustworthy or not, by trying to rescue the Moshai, who is basically a fancy priestess within their culture. This guy is Jal. He's the last party member to join you, and yeah, he's pretty cool. You get a lot of insight into the Angarans through him, and it can be amusing seeing how he reacts to the Milky Way race's cultures. While he's initially suspicious of you, he eventually grows to trust you and your team. From here, I'm basically gonna stop talking about the story so as to avoid spoilers, but the game pretty much follows the flow of go to this planet, do a few quests, activate the monoliths, reboot the vault, with various priority missions taking you to specific linear locations like in ME2 or 3. I think it works out pretty well, and while there's a lot of quests to do on each planet, you're not really required to do all of them except for cryo points, at least as far as I can tell. I also would like to point out how it's not just Eos that changes after the vault. In fact, the rest seem to change instantly after you complete them, becoming more hospitable, with the colors and overall atmosphere changing quite a bit. Environmental hazards either lessen or disappear almost entirely. It actually feels like you're terraforming these worlds. As for the cast, each party member also has their own loyalty mission, most of which are pretty good. Some of them even have multiple loyalty missions, although many of these are simply meet at the bar, sometimes literally. There's also the various romances, though I haven't seen most of them, since at the time of this writing, I've only romanced Vetra. And I think it was pretty well done. There's a lot of the innocent, awkward romance moments where the characters don't really know how to react to each other, and I actually got the sense these characters were connecting. Certainly nothing as bad as Liara's in ME1, where it was basically, Shepard, do we have a connection? Yes, even though we've never actually spoken about personal topics. We have a connection! Well, bang, okay? Now, a lot of people have complained about the tone of the game, comparing it to the current run of Marvel Comics movies, with things generally being lighthearted and full of quippy dialogue. And I can't say they're wrong. I don't mind it, even if there are a few inappropriate timings. I found myself chuckling at most of them. The whole thing has a similar vibe to the Citadel DLC from ME3. If you like that DLC, you'll probably enjoy this game's writing. I also want to bring up a major controversial aspect of the game here. It's been a definite aspect of why the game gets so much hate, and I think ignoring it would be a discredit to many of the legitimate criticisms people may have with it. Namely, the so-called SJW influence. Yeah, I know, this isn't a pleasant thing to talk about, and I generally try not to bring any of this political bullshit on this channel if I can help it. But I don't think you can talk about this game without bringing at least some of it up. And it's somehow both justified and at the same time entirely blown out of proportion. Probably the biggest moment of this is the debacle of a certain member of the development team who's rather infamous for tweeting some exceptionally petty and racist comments about white people, and it seems a number of people probably boycotted the game in response. And I can't really blame them. It's a shame the efforts of plenty of other people who, I assume, aren't hateful towards someone based off their race or skin color go ignored, and the guy was rightly fired from BioWare, but I totally get the reaction. Apparently the ability to make light-skinned Asians or Caucasians had to be patched into the game as well, and they didn't exist beforehand. I don't know if this was related to the previous aspect or not, but it's definitely a WTF moment. Another common complaint was how there seemed to be a lot of females in power. This one I don't really see. Yeah, there were female characters in power, but no more so than any other BioWare title. And like most leaders in a BioWare game who aren't the main character, most of them are depicted as being kinda incompetent. I think this is a complaint that doesn't really hold water. Another one I've seen come up is an Asari getting pissed off about gender pronouns. Now this one I totally get, since I'm pretty sure the Asari have always been referred to as an all-female race. And the whole pronoun thing reeks of SJW. Now I personally haven't actually seen this one for myself, but that doesn't mean it's not there, and it's probably the biggest complaint I've seen beyond the Twitter shitter. And it's pretty reasonable, given how it goes against some of the lore from the original trilogy. I'm not even a person who cares that much about the lore overall, and it kinda bugs me. I guess there was also a character who previously came straight up to you and basically went, "Hi, I'm an NPC, and I'm transsexual." But I guess it was patched out. Not only was that one not necessary, but just, dude, you just met me, I don't need to know that. And I'll probably never meet you again. That one's not just pandering, it's flat out poor writing. A lot of people want to bring up the mention of how the female protagonist is the default. I'm gonna go nah on this one. There are not a ton of games with customization that advertise the default protagonist as female, but I don't think that's enough to say they're pandering. I mean, maybe they are, but I'd also like to just think they were switching it up for a change. Now, a noticeable one was making FemShep the default in the history of the story. And yeah, I think this one is. Don't get me wrong, I vastly prefer FemShep, and a large reason of this is because of Jennifer Hale's amazing performance. That, and I tend to just prefer female customizable characters in general. But, come on, Mil Shepard is the one they used in 95% of the advertisements. He's the generic default in each of the trilogy, and he was on the box art. Yes, I'm aware of the FemShep art on the reversible cover and how she had her own trailer for Mass Effect 3, but I don't think that's really the same thing. Even if I was always planning on putting FemShep there, since that's generally who I played as, it comes off as pandering. A strangely common one people have been bringing up are the same-sex romances, though. I find this weird, since that's been a thing since Liara and ME1, and almost every BioWare title since has had it. This one I think might just be complaining for the sake of complaining. Anyway, as dirty as it makes me feel to bring that kind of stuff up, I think it did need to be addressed. It's clear that many of these complaints are valid, and they absolutely do exist. But I don't think it's such a major thing as to entirely avoid the game, outside of that first mentioned point. And let's be honest, that first one is really damn bad. We need something to get our minds off the politics. Take it away, writer.
I am Pathfinder. Rah, 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 rah.
I love that. As for the multiplayer mode, it seems to mostly be the same as ME3's, though I'm told it suffers from really, really bad lag at times. I can't really confirm, as I didn't really spend much time playing it. If you liked ME3's, you'll probably like this game's, and you aren't forced to play it to raise any sort of single-player stuff like in the previous entry. It's just there for funsies, and, well, microtransactions, which are of course bad, but I think you can ignore them here. Another major complaint is that the game cost something like $40 million and took 5 years to develop. Now, in all fairness, this was a team of rookies. You might think, why the hell would they put a noob team in charge of a major franchise? and that's somewhat understandable. However, I think the team did a decent job, all things considered. Should BioWare Montreal have had someone else supervising them? Perhaps. Does them being rookies justify the problems at launch? Not even remotely. Although much more experienced teams have delivered far worse bug fests at launch. Now, granted, maybe I'm underselling it since I wasn't there at launch. I do, however, have one major personal complaint that I couldn't think of where else to put before. The music. Okay, so the soundtrack isn't terrible or anything. It suits the game well enough. But for the life of me, I don't remember a single track other than the title screen and game over themes. There's so many tracks from the original games that I constantly hear in my head or feel the need to listen to again and again, and it's a shame Mass Effect Andromeda's music is just sort of there. Hell, even the songs I do remember haven't really left much impact on me, which is part of the reason why most of the music in this review is from the original trilogy. At the end of the day, I don't hate Mass Effect Andromeda. I don't think it's anywhere near being a bad game. It's not a perfect game by any means, and in many ways it feels like a rehash of the first game. The story follows many of the same beats, and like the original trilogy, there's not a lot in the way of bosses to put a cap on these encounters. There's probably 2 unique ones, and the rest are copied from that template. It's also lacking a bit in the enemy diversity, so many of the mooks you'll come across are largely the same enemy. There's some questionable design choices, and obviously some stupid social and political aspects thrown into the mix. But I have to say it's a pretty solid game. Frankly, I found it better than the first Mass Effect. Yeah, I know I'm gonna get hate for that one. The combat is a lot more fun, the exploration is considerably less tedious, and my goodness, the load times just completely blow the entirety of the original trilogy out of the water. Now you're probably sitting there thinking, but shouldn't it be better than the original trilogy in general? And ideally, yes. However, I still think that not being as good as the previous entries does not equate to bad. I legitimately do recommend the game. If you want to see if you'll enjoy it, there's a free 10-hour trial that covers up to the entrance of the Eos Vault, which is probably about 6 or 7 hours longer than you actually need. The trial is available through PSN, though I don't know if the Xbox One or PC versions have any such offer. It's a pretty decent chunk of the game to give a try. If you want to buy it but don't want to give money to EA, and let's be honest, who does, you can always try tracking it down used or something. Honestly, the game can be found for dirt cheap. I kid you not when I say I spent only $12 on my copy during a Christmas sale, and you can safely ignore the DLC since it's all multiplayer based as far as I can tell. I legitimately find it shameful that EA cancelled the DLC and killed off the BioWare Montreal studio. There was so much potential we could have gotten with a sequel. MEA was no masterpiece, but I found it better than I could have expected. I think this is a case of a good game getting overshadowed by ugly controversy and stupid decisions by EA more than anything. There's a lot of hate for this game, and I won't say much of it isn't justified, because a lot of it is. You'll often hear people say, this is why you don't buy games at launch. The problem is, it shouldn't be that way. You should be able to go out and buy a brand new game without any worries like, is it even playable? By the same token, I do think there was a lot of bandwagon hate, or some that was downright nitpicky. Many people outright ignored issues with the original trilogy and pretended like some of these problems exist only in Andromeda, which is just unfair. That being said, by now most of these problems should not exist in modern gaming. Either that or people are just pissed off by the lack of Batarians. Thank you guys so much for watching, even if you don't agree. If you enjoyed it, why not check out my review of Fallout 4, another game that split its fan base quite a bit, albeit nowhere near as much. Or if you want more Mass Effect, I've played through the first 2 games on the channel and am currently in the middle of the 3rd, so there's plenty to watch in that regard, unless you're annoyed by me already. Which you probably are.